Andy, welcome to This Is Horror.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Yeah, we're both very excited. I think I said before that The Witch in the Window was one of my favorite horror releases of really the last decade. And I'm happy to say that I've just watched The Harbinger, and that is amazing too. So, very,
Oh,
very
thank
happy
God.
to have you here.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, I wondered to begin with, I want to go all the way back to the beginning and talk about what some of the early life lessons were that you learned growing up. And this doesn't have to pertain to writing or storytelling, just anything that you learn in your formative years.
Hmm. Well, I grew up south of Boston, Massachusetts, um, in the suburbs. And I mean, I learned, I guess what my kids are learning now. I've got kids now that are 7 and 6 years old. So when I think about my childhood, I was someone who developed internally first. I was like tending my inner world, I think,
Mm,
before a lot of people, and not comfortable with the outer world, probably lagged behind in terms of like how I dealt with everything and everybody else, and how I being comfortable in my own skin and all of that was something that stories and storytelling and the storytelling community really saved me from. I didn't really come into my own until I found the theater kids, and the theater kids saved me. The drama club at my
right.
school, and that was the moment when I felt sort of saved and with my people, and uh, I've just latched onto that from that point on. It's changed over time. I mean, I've wanted to be a writer since I was 3 or 4, since I could remember, but how that manifested has changed over time, from probably wanting to write books when I was really young and then falling in love with scripts, and the margins that exist in the scripts for other ideas and other people to come in. And that's how a lot of introverts, I think, can discover community when you discover collaboration and things you want to be
Mm,
passionate about together. I was really lucky to have that as a kid. I had a great drama director. I actually had lunch with him last week. They're like getting on 30 years later. So it's my formative years were important to me, and I am someone who goes back and tries to reconnect with those feelings as much as I can. I stalk my childhood home like it's
mm,
no one's business.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, you said that you had aspirations to be a writer as young as 3 or 4 years old. So I'm wondering, in terms of story, what were some of the early stories that you were reading or experiencing? And again, was your introduction to story through books, or was it films, or was it the tradition of oral storytelling?
It was a little bit of all of that combined. My parents did take me to some like oral storytellers. We had some like local people that would like gather people in an auditorium, and so you'd feel that sense of congregation. But certainly films. I grew up, not to just be on the bandwagon, but I was a kid of the '80s, so I grew up with Spielberg and um, all the movies that sort of defined the sense of wonder that was so strong in that decade, largely because of him. And so, I think about my first experiences being like seeing the Goonies or seeing E.T. or Ghostbusters and Gremlins, both being stacked, I think, on top of each other, fresh from the video store when I was about 6. I always loved horror. So whatever version of it was appropriate for me at whatever age, whether that was like going from like the Are You Afraid of the Dark stories to graduating to like R.L. Stein and like Fear Street to getting a step up to like Christopher Pike in those books. But I was just begging my mom for a Stephen King from very inappropriately young ages until I
Yeah.
finally wore her down. I think she bought me The Dark Half when I was like 9 or 10. Like, should not have been reading The Dark Half, but you wear them down,
Yeah.
long enough, you get
Yeah.
your way. So I always felt like um, I remain a very timid, squeamish, sensitive person with everything nonfiction.
Mm,
If I see actual violence, I'm haunted. I take that like to
mm,
my grave. Like I'm really like, but I've always felt the safe, warm blanket of fiction. I've always understood that like something about it, if I know it's fiction, is like people making it together. Like there's love in it. It's like kind of sort of the opposite of violence. I've always
mm.
connected to that idea and found security in that.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say that a lot of your horror, whilst it is incredibly disquieting, it is hopeful. There is always a hopeful message within it.
I appreciate that. There's some debate around that. I think with the Harbinger,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
but I
I'm
do
thinking of
try.
something yeah, I'm thinking of something very specific with the Harbinger, but the problem is that for me to mention it would basically be to spoil it, which, I don't
Oh,
wanna
okay.
do
Yes, I
because
don't
I
want to do that
want
either.
people to go out and to watch it, but a all I'm saying is for people, once they have watched it, I would hope they would see some hope. There's certainly some
Yes,
bleakness as well. Man,
yes.
maybe we'll have to talk about it off air when it's not part of the podcast.
Fair enough.
And this is a challenge that I find we're talking about story in general. It is almost the difficulty of conducting one of these conversations that I don't want to ruin the magic. But then particularly when you have like such a tightly constructed film, it's like, well, goddamn, what can I say about it? Because I'm a person too who loves to come into things cold. The less I know, the better.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's important to me too. And here I am, of course, walking that line with my own stories. Like I have
Mm,
spoiled my own stories accidentally because I get so into talking about sort of the architecture of them.
yeah.
But the moment you dig into that, you'll just have to help me police myself on that,
Yeah.
not railroad my own work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where, the whole editing comes into play quite nicely as well. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, you just literally gave away the end. We're gonna cut that bit for now. But I mean, you said that you read The Dark Half at 9 or 10. Was that the first Stephen King novel that you read?
Yes. Yes, it was. It's a kind of a heavy way in. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Kinda.
But it left its mark. Yeah, some of those early. I mean, I'll never forget reading the descriptions of like some of the early murders in that story and the way the bodies are left, and certain details that I'm sure I just took in joyfully into my classroom and educated my classmates on the following day. But I think it was the dark half which disturbed me and kind
Mm,
of tantalized me. But I'm not the first time I was really afraid, like badly afraid, was The Shining. Was reading The
mm,
Shining, which I did read it before I saw the movie. And I love the movie to death, but I've never been more scared still than I was as a kid reading the scene. I don't even remember what is it, room 234.
y-
Yeah, I think that's
y-
it.
I think that's
yeah, I
yeah.
think it's
That
yeah.
famous scene was like I was not right for like
Mm,
days after reading that in a glorious way. So
yeah.
uh, I'm trying to foster the same in my kids. It has to be some push and pull for what's appropriate, but also um, I feel like even in just mainstream kids entertainment in the 80s, like horror was there when it shouldn't have been, right? Like Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Like I have to skip Large Marge when I show my kids that movie. Like that's horror. Like what happens to Christopher Lloyd's eyes at the end of Roger Rabbit is horror. That's I don't know. Very few things are scarier than whatever's going on there. So it's funny. I think we were exposed to a lot more. They were a lot trickier with how they introduced horror and things marketed to family entertainment. And now it's like the opposite. So it's like trying to find acceptable doses for my kids
Yeah.
to experience that.
Yeah, it's a really tricky line to walk as well because I mean, when I then look back at my childhood, it's like almost some of the best moments were watching the things that were clearly age inappropriate. But you don't want to actually psychologically damage your children, and it can go either way.
No,
It depends on the personality, I guess, of
yeah.
the individual. But
Yes.
yeah,
Well, my kids are in a particular situation because they know what I do. I mean, hell,
yeah,
they're in this movie, so they at least have a window into like when we're watching Star Wars or whatever, and someone gets zapped or lasered or anyone dies in anything. I remind them of what it feels like on set, and that person is now free to go to craft services and get a
yeah,
sandwich. So now, whenever someone dies in a movie, my kids turn to me and they're like, he's getting a sandwich, right, Daddy?" Like,
yeah,
yeah, you're just getting a sandwich, really a nice sandwich.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, so I know as well that you also do a lot of composing. So I mean, which came first? Was it more the music or the writing, or those two things that simultaneously you were doing at the same time?
The writing came first. I didn't realize I had any musical ability till a little later, maybe 12 or 13. Um, and then I started, since I was in the drama club, we were doing like musicals and stuff. And I got into singing, and I was always in singing groups, but I started just writing songs because I was learning the guitar. Like most nerds in high school, I was like, I'm going to get myself out of this. I'm going to like learn to play the guitar, and I'll just do a little better than I'm doing. Um, and songs just started to come out of me, and I never had ambition to be like, I've had bands, but I never wanted to be in that industry. That industry always felt so jacked up to me in terms of like all my musical heroes, not all of them, but more than half of them have failed. The people
Mm,
I literally think are the best songwriters in the world, like their bands didn't make it. So I saw that happen and was like, oh no, I don't trust that industry at all. Now I've gone into an industry that's also has its problems. But to me, it was always like a diary. Like writing songs was a diary. And then one day I had a professor that was working to write a musical for the stage. And he had always just liked my songs. And he kind of talked me into, oh, you're going to have to edit that bang out. My God.
yeah,
So my
the
professor
Harbinger.
talked me into, my God, everything's falling. Um, he talked me into doing music for this stage musical, and we developed it over a lot of years. And since then, every now and then, I'll go back and do a musical. The last couple we've done out of the Kennedy Center in Washington D.C., and they're family musicals about like squirrels and chickens, and like literally
Mm,
when I was making Witch in the Window, I was working at the Kennedy Center writing songs about squirrels and chickens for this Jane Goodall musical we were doing. And then at night I was editing a horror movie, and I just made no sense as a human being, but it was a lot of fun.
yeah, yeah, and I imagine with that kind of schedule, I mean, what kind of sleep were you getting? Not a lot by the sound of it.
It was not a lot of sleep. My wife was also pregnant at the time, and we were like living in a hotel room with two cats. It was like a crazy. It's one of those periods of time you look back on, and it was hard at the time, but it seems sort of romantic now.
Yeah. Does your wife share the same sentiments? Did she find that romantic when she's pregnant and you're just off making the witch in the window?
Definitely not at the time, but I think, yeah, I think every year that goes by, we're like, we can have the right perspective on that. I think it was a strange. It was in a transition. After my first two movies, I moved from LA back to the East Coast where I grew up to New York, and we were in that transition at that point. And I thought I was done. I was going to be making a shift to music, actually, to writing
Mm,
musicals, because I didn't think I could, like it was a hard experience on the first two movies. And I didn't have a co-director anymore, which I did on the first two. So, I had to
mm,
come around to getting myself back on my 2 feet. So music saved me during those years. And yeah, I do instrumental work too. I've certainly composed the scores for the last several movies, but that's not something I need to do going forward as much
mm.
fun as I've had doing it. I just have too many heroes that I'd be excited to work with who are better than I am.
Right. Well, that begs the question then, who are some of the composers you'd love to work with?
Oh yeah. So Nicholas Britell, who like the Succession theme and all, like the
Mm,
Justin Horowitz, certainly Reznor and Ross are near the
yeah.
top of any list I would be making there. Clint Mansell, Cliff Martinez. Um, yeah, I could go on this topic for a long time, but there's a lot of exciting people. I think Reznor and Ross, more than anyone, what they did when they did The Social Network at the
Mm,
beginning of the century, sort of, I think it changed how we view things, especially in the digital sort of synthetic space, and that it didn't have to sound cheap for being synthetic. Like if you like the amount of precision with the layers they work with, like it amazes me every time. So I'm really, really inspired by that, especially as someone who, when I do compose, I've never had the money to go into like an orchestra room and be one of those dudes like Hans Zimmer in the orchestra. Like that would be a
yeah.
dream. I can't wait if that ever happens. But no, I'm home at this keyboard you see behind me, and
Yeah.
that's so I need all those tools and tricks and things that they've brought into the space.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Reznor and Ross, I mean, they can just open up a world and a story in a way that you didn't even think was possible. It's like
Yeah,
I mean, they've almost changed the game with film composing, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. And Mansell and Martinez, I mean, yeah, obviously in most people's top 10, I would say.
I hope so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the Harbinger. So, goodness, where to even start with this? I mean, often when I'm watching a film, I kind of think like, what would be the tagline if I were to put this together? I don't know why I do that. That's just the thing that I do. But it's kind of like Jacob's Ladder meets The Exorcist for the COVID-19 generation. That's what I came up with. So
Oh
I
my
don't know if
God.
that's something you'd go along with.
Well, you've. I mean, not only would I go along with it, you've picked my favorite movie of all time, The Exorcist, with
Okay.
Jacob's Ladder, which was the literal tonal touchstone for The Harbinger. Like before I wrote it, I was on the phone with my producer, and that's the movie we talked about
Hmm.
because of it's my favorite dreamscape movie that isn't Nightmare on Elm Street, that is
Right.
human and sort of grounded, um and Tim Robbins in that movie is so warm. That's what I really love about that
Yeah.
movie. He's like a really warm-hearted character
Mm.
in this super cold, ugly world that
Mm.
that he's wandering through and going through all this. And I love that. It's the same friction I wanted with my protagonist, and the infusion of hope in a world that feels
Mm.
hopeless.
Yeah. It seems like I did quite well comping
You did
comping them
quite
with
well.
the
Like you could not have done better.
Well, excellent. And I mean, in terms of, setting it during the pandemic, was that an easy decision for you? Because I mean it's there, but you could have done it without it, but I think it obviously adds a layer to it because you've then got the juxtaposition of, this real nightmare happening in the world, COVID-19, and particularly because it's right at the start of the pandemic, there's absolute uncertainty. And then you've got the other nightmare of the Harbinger, which kind of blends like reality and dreams. And I would imagine going through that, which luckily hasn't happened because I am here rather than have been wiped off from ever existing, that's got to mess with you too. So, I mean, setting it in the pandemic, was that an easy decision?
No, no, it was not. It was not easy. It's we had a lot of debates about it. I had a close friend who was making the argument that I should set it in a parallel space,
Right.
to take some of the details away. And I really, really considered it. I think even if I did that, people would have known what I was writing about. So there was a point at which I
Mm,
was like, you know what? Like, if I know this community enough, like, if you are, like, the mistake would be to write about it on the nose and to try and have
mm,
some overarching message about it that was more important than the story. That is what I've learned over the years. I just think if I'm story first and I have a story that I love and could exist outside of this context but is fueled by this context, then I think if I'm working in that order, the horror crowd is going to look at anything. They're not, I don't think they're purely escapists. They just have a set of things that they want, and I want those things
mm,
too because I'm part of that community. So I get to sort of keep checking in with the me from the formative years, sort of, that we were talking about. Make sure he's cool with what I'm doing too, um, and that there's a roller coaster in there that satisfies me, but that I'm story first, and that, like, if we have something that everyone on the planet can tap into in terms of dread, we better go for that because that doesn't happen very
mm,
often. And that's what we do, right? We're trying to relate to one another as much as we can. So I don't think we get to put this away quite yet. I just don't think we need, like, straight dramas about it yet. I just think horror is perfect. Horror, there's a cushion, there's a lens, there's a way to digest this stuff. I think, easier, with one another. That was my hope anyway. And certainly when we made that decision, we didn't know where we would be now. We didn't, and I don't know. I know there are people who won't see it, at least for a while, who aren't ready for
mm,
it, but thankfully, so far, I was braced for all sorts of backlash, and for it to, at the moment anyway, be like my best reviewed movie, um, is a surprise, and it's really cool. It's really cool the amount of times I get to read, like, this is the COVID movie, you should see, or that this one is, not exploiting it or worth your time. And that was what we were really aiming for. Like, do it with just enough grace, that and make sure it's the fuel for the engine rather than the car, and we'll be okay.
mm.
Well,
Yeah.
it was very relatable, but it also made you feel, in a way, it was kind of comforting. It's weird to explain it like that, but to see it take a second seat to the story, I felt that hey, this is a world that we live in. This is reality. Like I mentioned before we started recording, I was sick. There's a slim possibility that I had COVID last week. It was very, very light, but there's a slim possibility in it. And I didn't have a test. I didn't have fever. I managed to not have to go to work. So, going and then watching the film today, I'm like, oh, wow, golly. The mask is like, it feels familiar because I've been wearing them, because I've been kind of
Yeah,
ill, so there's that familiarity to it. And it was almost like, hey, I've been there. I know where you're going, man. It's just like, it was very comfortable. And then it got
that's
very
cool.
disturbing. Yeah, then it got
The
it got
comfort,
extremely disturbing.
yes, the comfort short lived, but as long as it was there for a
Yeah,
moment. I mean, I think people do get some catharsis out of, seeing the lives reflected. And what was important to me was, like, if I was going to have a scene where a family's, like, wiping their groceries down, the dialogue better not be about wiping their groceries down. I just want to see them doing it because it's lived
right.
in and it's how we lived, but they're not
Hmm.
talking about it. They're telling a story about a sausage cart that runs away. And, that to me was like the way to play it.
Okay, I'm so glad that you brought up the sausage cart story because I was literally, as Bob was saying that, thinking, how the hell am I gonna segue to the sausage cart story? But you set it up for me. So it is this
I'm here for you,
based
man.
on anything that yeah, yeah. Is this based on anything that actually happened? Because this was an amazing and very, very specific story that you delivered, and I loved it. It
No,
did set
it,
us up
it
almost for like a false sense of security and false comfort, because it's like, oh, we got a little comedic sausage cart story. This is the tone. No, no, this isn't the tone. He's fucking with us.
that's right. No, all I knew is I wanted to see them in their groove together as a family. I wanted to see I wanted to feel sort of the love between them in an unforced
Mm,
way and this sort of flow between them and acknowledge like that silver lining a lot of us found. Like I was shut in with my family and like no one wanted to have all their plans canceled, but we also got all this time together that we never would have would have had. Like our lives never would have stopped enough for me to like live in my mom's basement the way I had to do for like a while. And like we just had, you know, the for those of us who were stuck with people we wanted to be stuck with, and I know that there was the opposite out there.
mm.
There were blessings to be found, and I wanted to acknowledge what that was. So I did to myself the worst thing I've ever done in a writing prep to myself. I wrote just funny story in my notes, and it's like the worst thing because it's like now I need a funny story that's actually funny, and engineering that is hard. But when I need comedy, I start with dogs and reverse engineer because I just love, you know, dogs. And so I don't know what, I just like spun my wheels on this for a few days and came up with this thing that then got made, believe me, 2 or 3 times better, at least by the actors just in that space, feeling it together and kind of riffing on it together. They had really great chemistry. And that was like second or third day of the shoot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know what the actors bring to it. It is almost difficult to believe that that didn't happen. That they're not all just like recalling this amazing incident.
That's good. That's good. That's the hope. They were. It was really fun. It was like the scene I was most scared to shoot because the blocking was so hard. I had all these bags. I had like charts of like, okay, here's what the groceries in each bag are, and here's where they have to
Yeah.
go, and then when they have to go to the fridge and to this shelf, and it wound up being like a really fun piece of theater because these were all theater actors, and theater actors
Mm,
love to learn like a whole chunk of stuff at the same time because that's what they do. So
mm.
rehearsing something that was almost like a dance and then making it feel lived in was like right up their alley, and it wound up being such a fun day.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, as someone who is immersed in theatre, do you find then often when you're casting for your films that you turn to theatre actors?
I do to some degree because I just have a lot of relationships in that space, but
Mm,
this was a particular incident where it was like the pandemic had provided this sort of production opportunity in that no all the theater actors were not in the theaters where they would have been
yeah.
at any other time running shows. So it was like, okay, some of the greatest actors in the world, whether or not we know them in our community. Like if you ask around New York, even before I made this movie, who were like the up and comers, you would have heard Gabby Beans and Emily Davis at the top of that list. Um, and for me, it was like a great opportunity to use them because there's this myth that stage actors are too big on the screen. I mean, it happens here and there, like they can't stop playing to the back of the house somehow, or they're like they don't know how to work close up, and it's a total myth 95% of the time. You ever see
Mm.
that HBO show High Maintenance
I
about the weed
haven't,
dealer who
no.
goes around on his bike? It's like it's really good. It's on HBO, and it is just basically a tour of all the best off Broadway, off Broadway, and Broadway actors working in New York doing little character bits. And in lieu of an actual casting director, this HBO show sort of became my casting director. I just
Mm,
watched it, you know, since there's only one character in common, they're just cycling through lots of different actors. So Ray Anthony Thomas, who plays the father Ronald, has a great episode of that. Emily Davis is on that, and we just not only was it going to be great to give these people work, but it let us stay in New York and stay safer and keep our bubble, like keep just fly people in from a lot less places and avoid huge quarantine times because everyone else shooting during that time had like a studio who could like help them shut down for a week if something went wrong, and we
mm.
didn't. We didn't have any safety net. We had to be, COVID had to be priority one the whole time, or there was always a chance we could just go home without a movie in the can.
Yeah, yeah, because I know from different people shooting that, during the pandemic, that there was just so many lists of like protocols and safeguarding, and if this happens, then
Yeah.
we have to do this and that. I mean, what kind of challenges or things did you have in place?
Oh, it was one big challenge. I mean, there was the testing, which ultimately
Mm,
was good because it's the thing that gave you peace of mind. Once your whole company tests negative, well, you're there for
mm,
14, 15-hour days. No one else is going anywhere. So you like relax until the day off.
mm,
But it was the like air. We had these really loud air filters that whenever we weren't rolling, these air filters had to be on, but you couldn't hear yourself think over them. And then there was the masks, of course, which I'm used to calling cut and then looking around the room, and I can tell from everyone's face like what they think of what we just did. And suddenly it
yeah.
was like, oh no, I can't see anybody. I can't read their eyes. I don't like now. I've got to learn how to communicate without all those little micro expressions that we normally
Mm,
have the advantage of. But that all those were wrinkles that got ironed out pretty fast. And this was a good family. Like film sets can feel like war sometimes, if they're not set up with the right people. And this was actually for like a pretty cold, heavy movie. This is a warm place to come to work every day. There was a lot of really good hearted people and like we figured it out. Um, so it was my favorite shoot that I've had. It was very
mm,
short. It was 14 shooting days as we did this in,
mm,
which I think is the least that
yeah.
I've had. I think we had maybe 15 or 16 on Witch in the Window.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, of course, like part of this as well is sleep paralysis. So, firstly, I'm wondering, have you ever suffered from sleep paralysis?
No, I have not. I've suffered from bad bouts of nightmares. I've suffered
Mm,
from a few experiences that may or may not be actual supernatural experiences from when I was young, like that I still don't know if it was a dream or if something else was going on, but not the traditional stories of sleep paralysis. And that documentary, The Nightmare about sleep
Ooh.
oh,
paralysis, is
yeah.
definitely that's another movie that got in here. That scared me pretty
Mm,
bad. Thing about that movie is it it feels a little dangerous. It feels a little bit like, am I now going to have this thing because I'm watching the movie and now the idea's in my head? So some of the stuff in the Harbinger about how he's actually a bad idea and how bad ideas
mm.
spread, I wanted to get a little bit of that danger that I felt when I was watching The Nightmare, like with the viewer kind of second guessing their own exposure just by watching the movie.
I think you absolutely nailed it. And in fact, I had a
Mhm.
little note to bring that up because I feel like, due to the nature of the demon in the Harbinger, that there is almost a risk as a viewer. Like, we're making ourselves susceptible, we're becoming almost complicit. And even, if we're to take this mythology further, and why not, even us having a conversation now, I've mentioned the Harbinger so many times. Fuck, I said it again. What's going to happen to me? Like, we are playing with fiction and reality and creating this dangerous entity. And the more we give voice to it, the more the weirder it becomes.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's exactly very well put. I love movies that play with that The Ring sort of I guess does that to some degree. It's
Yeah.
that I think that's the first time as a young person I felt that danger in the theater watching The Ring.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, maybe it was a more innocent time then, or we were just less aware of, what's going on behind the camera. So it's like, hang on, they're watching this
Mm.
video and then they're dying. I'm not sure I should continue watching this. This seems a little bit of a
Mhm.
risky thing to be doing. Maybe I
Yeah,
should turn it off. Well, I didn't turn
yeah.
it off, and now I'm in Japan, so maybe I was brought to the homeland of the ring. we'll see what happens. But nothing has crawled out of the television set yet. But there is a television set just out of view of the camera. I'd say I'll let you know if you will
No, you
know if
won't.
Sadako comes out of that, because I'll be gone. I'll be gone. She'll turn up. It'll be even more wild than if was it what were we talking about, the headless horseman or something like that? If Sadako turns up, that is how you end a This Is Horror podcast episode. It's probably the perfect way to end. Like, this is our 10th year of the podcast, so it's like 10 years, 500 episodes. Michael's dead. Sadako's here. Good night.
That would do it.
Yeah.
I want to see
do it,
Sadako fight the headless horseman now. You know, I mean,
I'd watch that.
we had the Ring versus the Grudge.
Yeah,
so
we did.
now we've got to have, you know, basically the Ring versus, you know, the headless horseman, and we should do it on This Is Horror.
Did we?
And see, and it's just like the Harbinger. See, if I plant this idea, it will happen.
That's right.
Okay.
Like,
special pay-per-view episode, fight night. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And Michael already knows, as soon as we start talking about night terrors, I have them. I get sleep paralysis.
Oh, really?
And it never fails. Within the next couple of weeks, I will have a episode of it.
Do you like see the guy and everything? Does it go that far?
I have seen the shadow people, but I have not seen the shadow people in a long time.
Okay.
And what's that? There's another film that deals with that. Come True, I think. It was on Hulu.
I haven't seen that. I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it deals with the shadow people, and I had a really hard time watching that movie. And you know, and then I watched, and then watching The Harbinger, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, there we go. We're gonna be having some. We're gonna have an episode. And being a fan of horror, you know, I mean, it's like, it's not real. It's like, but the realest fucking part of it is the fact that the idea will be planted in your head, and it causes you to have the actual, an episode of it. And so it's life imitates art from the seed of an idea. It's, or maybe art imitates life. Who knows?
Wow. That's like, well, I hope, and it's funny because it's like, I don't, as much as I like want that dangerous element, I hear something like that, and internally, all I'm thinking of is like, please don't let, my movie, give you an episode. It's like, it's funny. It's like not ultimately what I'm after is to do damage or like to make, but like, see, you're someone who continues to love horror through that and watch horror. So like there must be something in there that's not entirely damage.
No,
hopefully.
I mean, a lot of my influences have come from, early dreams that I remember, having as a kid, and some of the imagery that I try to, I guess that we all have like motifs, and our brands, and some of that stuff gets, in my work, in my fiction. And it's just, fortunately I have insomnia. So the only way that I can really that the idea will trigger an episode, but also long bouts of insomnia will allow me to slip into REM very quickly if I'm exhausted and finally do get to sleep. And that's usually when it happens, because you get in this you get this real quick REM, but you're not in deep sleep yet. And then that's when you feel like you can't get up, and seeing, and watching the film and seeing Mavis, standing there, not being able to wake up. I'm like, okay, I've never stood up before, but I have sat up before. I have woken up, sitting up in my bed going, oh shit, that was a bad dream. And it's like, and you look at your, you look at your clock, and like 2 minutes have passed, and you're like, I was in the dream world for hours. but it's only
Crazy.
been 2 minutes. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, this is why it's cool to write about dreams. You're gonna be tricky
Yeah.
doing it because you can enter like kind of cheap territory if you're not scared. But like I that was the other conversation we had before we made the movie. Not only like, are we, or should we make the pandemic movie, but should we make a dream movie in a world where like Freddy Krueger has the market cornered? And it's like, no, he cannot have the market cornered on dreams because um, it's like kind of like the pandemic when we talk about things we all share. This is a mystery we all share. We don't fucking know what they are. We still don't really understand them, or how to interpret them, or it's a mystery we all carry, and because you have to sleep, we all face it continuously. So like it's kind of irresistible.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said, and Bob will have known that I would latch onto this and bring it back, but you said that during your childhood, you had a couple of experiences that may or may not have been supernatural. I don't let anyone say something like that and not elaborate on it. So please tell us about these experiences.
Yes, well, there's one central experience, and it is um, not in any very specific contextual way, but it is the spark for The Witch in the Window.
Mm,
So when I was young, I was up. I think I was probably 7 years old, and I was up reading. Um, so I was sitting up in bed with the lamp on next to me,
mm,
but the house was
mm,
quiet, and I heard music growing in my ears. Directionally, it sounded like it was coming from down the hall and
mm,
coming closer to the room, as if the music was an entity. And it was an orchestra, and I can hear it. I can hear the chords very clearly, like they'll never leave my head. But it's a very
mm.
urgent sounding thing. It sounded kind of like boom, 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 boom. It kind of had that slow
Yeah.
march to it. And I
Yeah.
knew it was right outside the door, which was mostly closed. So I shut my eyes, squeezed them tight, prayed for it to go away. The music sort of suspended, and I opened my eyes, and there was a face just that I could see in the middle of the room. It was a man's face. He was like a bald guy, and he looked really angry. And he said, and I don't know what this means or why, it's a very strange sentence, but he said there once was a girl named Lydia, and she didn't care about anything. And he shouted that. And then the shout kind of sprang my paralysis, kind of broke, my body, so I
Mm,
could move my muscles again. And I panicked, and I screamed for my mother, and threw the covers up, and the music, and it was all gone. And my mother was there, and she was convinced me it was a dream, even though I was never down. So you do what you do when you're 7 years old, and something like that happens. You sleep with your parents the rest of the night. So the really
mm,
fucked up thing is, I'm in my safe place. I'm between my parents in their bed. Later that same night, it comes back. Same music down the hallway, this time to my parents' room. And when the face appears, it was like more skeleton like. And it just
mm,
shouted, "Do you hear?" And this time the music went back down the hallway, and my mother was already up talking to me, and I could still hear the music receding, and she
mm,
couldn't hear anything. Um, so she convinced me a lot of years, that I was asleep during this whole thing. And I finally, when I was like 14 or 15, got her to admit that
mm,
I was awake when she came in. I was awake during this whole thing. I wasn't prone to nothing like that ever happened. We built this house. This was not like a house we moved into that had any history to it. The land had some history, but um, anyway, that's like how I named Lydia in The Witch in the
mm,
Window, and sort of uh, seeing the look in my mother's eye when she admitted to me that I was awake kind of sparked those themes for me in that movie, and what I feel now, and like the things you can't protect your kids from, the things you don't understand, and what a particular kind of fear that is. So that's my big strange ghost story.
that is absolutely wild. And you're just like, you were going to gloss over that?
I know.
It's like, oh, this little incident. This was not a little incident. um,
It was
Goodness,
very
though, with
creepy.
the face shouting, "Do you hear?" It's like, yes, I bloody well hear. What do you want? Please go. It's very, very easy to hear. It's
Yeah,
absolutely
I remember
terrifying.
I would like go through the records of the land and try and find
Mm,
Lydia and stuff, because like the other thing about growing up for me was my mom was in hospice, was her job, so she
mm,
was like in the normal course of her day, she could very likely be by a deathbed at the moment of passing. And she
mm,
saw like a lot of amazing things over those years. So I was like in a house of believers and kind of in a no doubt way. It was just a part of life. And I
mm.
learned over time how unusual that is. Now that I'm really the outlier as someone who believes in the supernatural to a degree, which I do. A
Mm,
degree. I don't pretend to know things exactly, but I know that there's more than we think we know.
yeah. So, I mean, in terms of your personal beliefs, would you just, you'd say you believe that there is something supernatural, there is something beyond life, but it's probably harder for you to go any further than, that's about the limit. There's something out there. I don't want to
I
mess with
mean,
it.
I believe in. I'll go far enough to say as I'm not. I don't say anything with certainty, but what I subscribe
Mm,
to generally is I do believe in past lives.
mm,
Um, and so that's sort of the root that's always connected uh, the most to me, and then that my mother sort of passed down. And so that much I've always been interested in, and I'm fascinated hearing people who go to like past life
mm,
hypnosis sessions, or those those
yeah.
events sometimes. So some of those people my mom met in the course of her work, and some of the people who you'd guess as reasonable people would be total quacks are not,
Mm,
or at least they don't know that they are, or like something more interesting is going on. There's
mm,
things going on in that space that are interesting, and then there's other things going on in that space that are bullshit, and you have to be careful.
yeah. Yeah. Do you occasionally, start researching Lydia again? Like, I need, I need the answer. Who is this Lydia?
No, I've passed it on now. I've given Lydia to the rest of the world so I can be free of her. That's how I thought of
Yeah,
Witch in the Window. It was like, I'm taking whatever this is, it's yours now, and I don't think
yeah.
about her so much anymore.
I mean, so that was actually a very cathartic experience for you. You did almost exercise your own demon, as it were.
Yeah, that movie was cathartic in a lot of ways, because that was also like the first thing I did on my own, and I made it like in Vermont, which is like my favorite place on earth, and it was the first time I was like, oh, I can do this and not be like really at war and miserable and uptight all the time from doing it. Like there's a way to do this um, that's that's sustainable
Mm,
and fun. And it was the first time I really had a proper amount of fun on a film shoot, mostly because we just didn't know what we were doing to set it up right the first couple of times. Like I didn't make, I wasn't someone who, I probably, if I could go back, I'd be one of the people who made like a few more shorts before I
mm,
jumped in. But by virtue of the fact that we jumped in without knowing what we were doing, we made some crazy shit that we never would have
right.
made otherwise. Particularly, Yellow Brick Road being. I mean, I don't watch that movie, but I have trouble looking in the rear view. But I know we made a polarizing piece of, like, we took a crazy swing, and I'll always be proud of crazy swings. I mean, that's what I would have wanted to see when I was a kid.
Right, yeah. And I mean, if you contrast making Yellow Brick Road with making The Witch in the Window, I mean, how would you contrast those two experiences?
Total opposite from each other. Yellow Brick Road, we were in a dangerous place on purpose. We were like at the
Right.
northern tip of New Hampshire. I mean, we just went to the place we wrote the movie in, not knowing any
Mm,
better, thinking like, we could have just set up on the side of the road somewhere and pointed the camera into the woods, and it would have looked like we were in the middle of the woods, but we still would have had cell phone reception and like access to airports. Instead, we were in this place it was like we were in the 70s, and there were like moose everywhere, and like people get killed by like hitting their cars with moose every summer in this place. And I
Yeah.
had students that I had taught, because I taught at Middlebury College, my alma mater, a few times, and we brought the students over, and I was like, I just thought someone was going to die on that set. I was like, this is dangerous. I have to get everyone through this experience. And it did feel like war. It was like it was a great experience at the end of the day, but it was really, really, really hard. And Witch in the Window was the opposite. It was like, we're in like mostly one location. We're going to drop anchor. We're going to have this family environment. Um, we're not going to reach for more than what we can grab with our budget. It's like written
Mm.
for the resources a little bit more appropriately, which let us, I think, follow through. It was the first time I felt like I'd stuck the landing, because it wasn't such a stretch, and it was just a nice place to come to work in the morning. It either goes military or family. I don't know why, but sets go one way or the
Mm.
other, and you have to be careful about how that tone gets set, because you don't always have control over it. That's what I didn't realize coming from theater. If you direct in theater, you set the tone. You're the voice in the room. You want to be like, I'm a type B leader, right? I'm like a calm, steady dude. That's what I want to feel at the center. I'm not an aggressive alpha director. Um,
Mm.
but if you're on a film set, what I didn't realize is if you can be anything you want to be. If you hire an aggressive alpha first AD, your set's going to be like that. They'll set the tone. You won't be able to do it. You'll be too busy scrambling in the 40 directions you're scrambling in. So I learned that the hard way, and now I'm really, really careful with the chemistry of the set, and making
Mm.
sure we have like a really fertile, warm environment to work in.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Bob, did you have something? Something's
The
tickled
only
you.
thing I was gonna say is, after watching, Heart of Darkness, and you're talking about Yellow Brick Road, I'm like, this was your apocalypse now.
Yeah.
Almost, the feeling that hey, let's go to where we said it. And it's like, and you don't
Yes.
even think about that shit. And as a viewer, I don't even think about that shit. Because hey, it's a movie, but y'all actually didn't even have cell phone reception out there.
No, we really didn't. We had to go. We had to drive
Yeah.
30 minutes for internet. I mean, in where were we? It was 2009. We were shooting,
Mm-hmm.
and we were like, yeah, it felt like 30 years earlier. It was really great. We were also using the Red camera for the first time. Like Peter Jackson had just like introduced it, so we were using this camera that was like a computer when we didn't understand what that was, and it would like break down in the sun, and like it was really pretty crazy, but it was also it was like it changed everyone's life. I don't know if it changed everyone's life for the better. Maybe it sent a few people down a bad path, but like it really felt like a gauntlet we ran, and no
Wow.
one was quite the same when we got back. I mean, hell, I married one of my cast members and have kids with her, so it changed my life in every way possible.
Mm-hmm. That could make an interesting story in itself. Maybe not, about that particular movie, but the fallout of a polarizing film.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like, and kind of do it docu style. Hey,
totally.
yeah. But yeah, that'd be crazy.
Yeah, that's what I remember thinking every day. I was like, please don't let the documentary of the making of this movie be scarier than the movie we actually make, because that's not what we want.
That would be crazy.
It's not what you want, but now that Bob is pitching that idea, I kind of do want it. I kind of want that. I mean, that'd be interesting to go for like a kind of faux documentary, almost found footage style movie. Is that anything that you'd be interested in doing?
Yeah, we did an anthology in between Yellow Brick Road and We Go On for Chiller TV,
Mm.
back when Chiller TV was a thing.
Mhm.
Um, that's a found footage thing about a song that kills you if you listen to it. Like Emily Hagan's had a segment in it, and Miko Hughes from Pet Sematary. And I mean, it was a silly little anthology, but I liked doing found footage. I actually have a found footage script that I've written recently that I think it needs new angles at this point. I think the space is pretty crowded. My found footage movie is in a small craft airplane, so it's a very different feeling. It's actually the
Mm.
opposite of shaky. It's all like GoPros strapped
Mm.
to like a Cessna. Because I'm like an aviation bug. So that's the thing. If I heard there was a found footage movie in horror in the sky, like I'm there. So
Yeah.
I'd set out to do that. But I like, yeah, for me, it's like, it's a story. It's story first, right? So if the story,
Mm.
I think it's unusual that I think of a story where found footage is going to be the best medium to tell it. But this was the first time that's happened to me. And once I realized that, yeah, I'm all for it. Like Blair Witch Project in Boston, when I saw it, was still the scariest movie experience I've had, because I was in a
Yeah.
packed house of people who didn't know what it was. And
Mhm.
the fear in that room was super contagious. And again, it felt dangerous.
Well, this is what I was thinking of too when we mentioned, the ring and people being unsure, like, is this a good idea? But with the Blair Witch Project, I remember certainly in the UK, almost just with the promotion and the way it was pitched, there was ambiguity. It's like, hang on, is this a film? Is this real? What are we watching here? And I think to a lesser extent, but still certainly there was a similar thing, 5 or so years later with Paranormal Activity, particularly just,
Yes.
the way that it was set up. I mean now, because there's been so many Paranormal Activity films and so many kind of rip-offs of it, it almost feels like cliche or obvious. But at the time, it was like, are we actually seeing surveillance of a literal paranormal event? So both of them were terrifying, and I
Yeah.
think as well, suspense and build up is key, and they were both Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity were so subtle with the build up and getting to the real chaos and the horror. Again, something that you did masterfully in the Harbinger, because that, it starts off, it's all sausage carts to begin with, isn't it? We're all having fun, but then suddenly shit kicks off in a big way.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a question attached to that.
Sorry. I was just sort of like,
maybe there
is it,
wasn't.
can you hear me nodding? Is that good for an interview? And I just nod. Sorry about
It, it,
that.
it is fantastic for what is predominantly going to be put out as an audio piece. You just gotta. Maybe you need to like wear a hat with a bell on it or something. Oh, okay. There you go. That's the nod.
I can provide narration. Andy nods in agreement.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, Bob has got the voice for narrating, horror films. So I think if anyone's going to narrate it, it would be Bob.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
Which is why I don't do none of the intros or outros for This Is Horror. I do. I have done a few, but but I tend to flub things and then I don't want to do it because I do a lot of the ads and I'll tell you a little secret. The file that Michael gets is sent in rage usually because I've done it like 50 fucking times. I can't even get through the first sentence.
But see, it's beautiful. It's a results oriented thing. That's like
Yeah.
when I make music, I'm a terrible like technical player of the music that I write, but like no one knows, like a guitar solo. I had to do a guitar solo once. I think I did 100 takes. And still the last thing I put out was like a comped version of like like the good moments from, like, it's not like I ever did it straight through, but no one ever knows if they listen to the album about
Yeah. Well, they
all that
didn't.
rage.
until
They
you
didn't
just
until now.
literally
They do.
admitted it. Now they know. Now they know. You've
My
said it.
only good guitar solo I ever recorded. That's how
Yeah.
it happened and
Yeah.
why.
That sounds like
Yeah.
Eddie Van Halen. David Lee Roth said that Eddie would record multiple solos and then piece them together and then learn that. So
Wow.
yeah, so
Yeah.
basically he would take like 5 or 6, piece the parts he liked, and then record it and then learn that note for note, and that was his solo. Then he recorded the solo, the real solo.
Wow.
And
That's
I'm
really
like,
cool.
that's
That makes me feel
perfectionist.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps one of the most frightening things about the Harbinger is that, this is set in a world where when the character dies, they are erased from existence as if they never lived to begin with. And perhaps it's so terrifying because it's like, well, this is conceivable that this could be happening. This could be happening constantly. We would never know.
Right.
So
Mhm.
it's such a fascinating concept. How on earth did you arrive at this idea?
I've had this one, that element has been swirling around my head for years before there was any context. I remember, I think I outlined a slasher movie like 3 or 4 years ago where I don't remember what the reason was, but like the idea that people were pulled completely from reality has been attractive to me for a while. But at first, it was only on sort of a technical level because I hate writing like detectives and like police coming in to like invest. Like you just have to deal with that when you kill people in your story because that's the world. And I was like, oh, if I do this, I don't have to write any of those policemen or any of those detectives that I hate writing. The story can just kind of jump forward.
Mm.
And I really liked that feeling, but I never had the right context. And then, it took on this whole new dimension when we were in 2020 and we were all feeling that existential dread and we were losing tons of lives and people weren't able to process the amount of lives being lost or unable to be at the bedsides of people they were losing, all of that heaviness. Um, what really made me feel that the fabric of our identity is each other, is how we live in the minds of the people that we love and the memories of the people we love, and we were losing that fabric was sort of dissolving during that time. And I just became hyper aware of that, and I was like, this is I think these things fit together. This adds a context and a dimension and um, it puts that technical thing that I was excited about to use in a kind of an emotionally productive way. So that's sort of what ticked everything off, and the story really kind of grew from there.
It increased the stakes as well.
It did. It's like, how do you increase the stakes beyond life and death,
Hmm.
right? That's always the stakes in horror movies. It's
Right,
death. It's the ultimate stakes, and it's like, no, there's something worse.
right. And it's now you really tapped into something there, and it's. I think a lot of creatives, especially in horror, they kind of play around with that. I had an idea that if somebody died, then let's say like an actor died or something like that, and suddenly a movie that you loved was different because they weren't in it. You
Yeah.
can remember, wait, wasn't that guy in there? And it's like, but that idea is so vast that it
Yeah.
had to be, it's something that like maybe Steve Erickson could write it, and he kind of tapped into that with Zeroville, but still, it's like, the movie that's in every movie. Well, what about the actors that are no longer in any movie? And then
Yeah. I like that.
it's crazy.
Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that can start a whole, it's I think that for me it's usually like a moment that a movie's built around, but in this case it was an idea. It was that very concept and that idea infusing that with the feelings, which is with like something like Witch in the Window. It was literally the scene in the movie that gets talked about the most. There's a cell phone call. I won't spoil it, but people who
Mm.
know the movie, if you mention the scene with the cell phone, they know what you're talking about. That was literally before it had any context, or I knew what the characters were that populated it. I knew what that moment felt like. And I was like, that's a special moment. I can literally work forwards and backwards from that moment and build something that feels special, you know?